Welcome. Today is March 28th, 2023, and we're going to go ahead and start our Mobility Coordination Working Group meeting. I'm Janine Sullivan. I am the Transportation Mobility Coordinator here at PEMA Association of Governments. So welcome to everyone. We're going to start with some brief introductions and to allow everyone who's attending this meeting as a panelist to share who they are, what organization they work for, and perhaps a little bit of their brief role. And then we'll go ahead and get started with the next item on the agenda. So in no particular order, just based on how I might be seeing your name on the screen, I'm going to start with Shaylin Turney.
Good morning, it's Shaylin, and I'm with Project More. And good to see you all, or hear you all.
Thank you, Shaylin. Good morning. All right, and then Steve Knapp.
Good morning. My name is Steve Knapp. I'm with Hope Inc. and I'm their operations manager. And I make sure there's paint on the walls and the wheels on the bus go round and round.
Great. Thank you, Steve. I appreciate you joining us this morning. Mike Alexander.
Present, this is Mike with Oro Valley Dial-A-Ride.
Hi, Mike. Good morning. Thanks for joining us this morning. And I'm going to apologize in advance if I'm mispronouncing your name, Lori. But Lori, if you could go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yes, I'm Lori Malangone, and I'm with the Tucson JCC.
Hi, Lori. Thank you for joining us today. And then Francis or Franny. I don't know if you can hear me or not. Maybe not. Well, good morning, Franny. I see you on the screen, so I know you're with us today from Tohoto O'odham Skilled Nursing Care Authority, so I appreciate you being here today. And then Dylan Garrity.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dylan Garrity. I work with Suntran. I'm the transit planner.
Hi, Dylan. Good morning. Thank you for joining us. And then I see Jessica Winchester.
Hi, yes, I'm Jessica Winchester, and I am a director at Catholic Community Services and the Vocational Services.
Great. Thank you, Jessica. I appreciate you being here this morning. Let's see if I certainly forgot anyone. I think James Campbell or Jim Campbell. Jim, I don't know if you can hear me or not. So I believe Jim's from the Beacon Group. I'm not sure if he's having some tech challenges or not. So good morning, Jim. Thanks for joining us this morning. And then hopefully I didn't omit anyone unintentionally. So just for the sake of good measure, in case I am missing someone in terms of introductions, if there's anyone else that I accidentally overlooked here, please go ahead and introduce yourself. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. So we're going to move on to the next item, if you will, on the agenda after introductions. So like we do in all of our meetings that you've attended in the past, we do in-kind reporting. So our regional planning efforts are enhanced by recording the time that's actually donated by any of the attendees, the volunteers or participants. And so we collect that data on the time dedicated to those meetings and any activities to apply for use as matching funds for grants and federal dollars. So if you as an attendee are paid with federal dollars, please let us know now so that we don't record your time for that. So any time spent in preparation for this meeting will be estimated by PAG staff who are knowledgeable of the agenda and of course the meeting materials. And then at the conclusion of this meeting, a session report is automatically calculated your time spent in this meeting and then time spent working on any PAG or RTA initiatives, programs, and special projects may also be eligible for consideration for matching funds. So if there's anyone that is paid through federal dollars, please let me know so I don't include you in our in-kind reporting. And if you're having some tech challenges with the mic or whatever right now, please be sure to send me an email saying, hey, don't include me in your in-kind reporting because I'm paid federal dollars. So thank you for your support in that. So having concluded the in-kind reporting, we're going to move on to our next item on the agenda. And so on the agenda, you'll probably have noticed that the first item, if you will, of discussion is with regard to increasing access through coordination. So if we could go ahead and pull up that slide, you will go ahead and start the discussion on that. So for increasing access through a coordination, there's a variety of talking points, if you will, that I'd like to kind of facilitate or lead the conversation in a bit around. And so the first is everything that we're going to talk about is, of course, in alignment with our PAG Public Transit Human Services Coordinated Transportation Plan. And so with that, the aim is to advance regional coordination. So the first item I'd like to kind of bring to the forefront is having us have a discussion or share what we believe are our core strengths as individual organizations, but also as like a collective working group that is solving for advancing coordination. So I'm going to start out by giving some examples, and this is not an all-inclusive list, but it is just to kind of get the conversation rolling, if you will, because I'd like for it to be a very participative meeting versus me just imparting information. So when we talk about determining strengths as an organization, some of you come to the table with very specific bench strengths or talents or best practices, right? In how either you provide your transportation service to the region or how you serve your individual clients or members, right? And so each of you may be serving clients or members with very specific needs, and what it takes to be able to serve them well requires a certain skill set, talent, best practices, knowledge, insights, training, resources, and then the kind of list flows from there. So what I'm curious for us to kind of share with each other is what are those things that we each bring to the table? And our slides are moving quickly. We're already on adjournment. I got to talk fast. I'm just kidding. So we're still on number 3, increasing access through coordination. But I'm interested in what are the things that we each bring to the table that we can say collectively as a working group, what are our strengths? And then through those strengths, what are our opportunities to use those strengths to advance regional coordination? So I'm not going to right out of the gate call on anyone specific unless I feel like I really need to give someone kind of a nudge to brag about themselves a little bit. But I'd ask for each of you to kind of think really quickly on what are the things that you know to be true about your organization that you do well in serving your clients or members, and of course serving the region. You might be able to share with the working group so that we can move the needle on coordination. So I'm going to go ahead and open up the floor, and it sounds like a couple people might have joined us. So I'm going to take a look at that and see who also joined so I can make sure that I welcome them. So if anyone would like to start, the floor is open for you to kind of share and kind of brag about yourself a little bit, right?
Hey, Janine, this is Rhett
Yeah.
Greenfield,
Hi.
Transit Administrator, City of Tucson. Hi, we have been on a hiring binge for the past several months for Sunvan to provide that service. It's been getting very much an increase in demand over the past several months. And so we've been hiring more drivers, hiring more folks to ensure that that program is available to all the people that need it in our zones around the city. So that's one way that we've been getting better as an organization.
Okay, great. And do you mind sharing any things that you think that have really paid off and allowed you to attract a certain caliber of talent to be able to meet the needs within our region? Anything that you'd like to really point out?
Yes, that's a great point. The people that come to work for us at Sunvan, they have a very customer-centric approach and perspective. and they come to help other people. And we've noticed that in terms of our hiring experience with these people. So it's been a very positive thing for a while now. And they know when they come to work for Sunvan that they're going to be helping a population of people that are going to appreciate that. So it's been, all in all, it's been nothing but positive.
Very good. Thank you. You know, one of the things that while you were sharing that came to mind is with the on-demand service that you have. I think a vast majority of drivers, if not all your drivers for that service, are, I believe, also Sunvan drivers. So they bring that skill set to the table to be able to help people with specific needs. So I think that's perhaps like one of your other core strengths is kind of that cross-training component where people are or serving people in a transportation capacity as a driver can meet the needs of a wide range of people, regardless of if they're operating under Sunvan or some of the other more fixed route services, if you will. So I don't know if that's kind of a part of your recipe, if you will, of attracting the right talent in your hiring efforts or not, but I know
It's true.
Serving you well in that way.
Yes, the people that apply to drive a Sunvan are generally different from the people that apply for the fixed route. It's a very different service, so they have to have a different personality type, I think, to some degree. To your point,
right? Yeah, very good. So thank you so much for sharing that. I appreciate it. Who else would like to share some of their strengths or their best practices? I know with the grant cycle that we just, the grant application cycle that just closed, a lot of you within your application probably put in a lot of your great efforts and work that you've been doing over the years. So it's perhaps fresh in your mind. So if there's anything that you'd like to kind of share, feel free to incorporate that into this component of the discussion.
Janine, this is Mike with Oro Valley.
Hi, Mike.
I have a question for Rhett. Rhett, the people that you're hiring for Sunvan, is it all full-time, part-time, mix?
Hi, Michael. It's mostly full-time, but we do, when we can, we do add people part-time to fill in those gaps because this, you know the hours of the service. So it's been it's a mix, but it's going to tilt to full-time.
Okay. Do you know how many you've hired in, from the beginning of the year?
No, but I can get that information for you.
Yeah, I was just curious to see the difference because we hired all part-time, and yeah, we have a hard time hiring people. And then when we do, okay, great, I'm hired, but I'm gonna take the summer off. So it makes it difficult for us.
Oh yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah,
Okay.
let me work on that. I'll work on it right now, as a matter of fact.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. That's a great question. So I'm just going to chime in a little bit here with hiring practices, if you will. I know, Mike, you asked a question, and Rhett, you had shared some information about what contributes to your success of hiring full-time drivers. But I'm just curious, with all the different organizations that are represented here, when they do their driver training to ensure that people are going to achieve a certain level of excellence in providing those transportation services to their clients or members, what are some things that really stand out to you and saying, you know what, I think this is what sets our training apart, or I think this is where perhaps we include something in our training that perhaps either other organizations don't include because they don't necessarily have to think about these things to the depth that we do, or yes, they might train in this particular area, but the scope of which they train might not be quite as broad or as deep. So just kind of curious, what are some of the driver training practices that people have identified that work well for their organizations? Because we all are serving in a transportation capacity, and there are some driver training practices to be shared. So if anyone would like to lean into that and share some of the things that they do at their organizational level, and I'm not trying to strong arm anyone, but since Mike and Rhett were chatting a little bit and sharing some information, perhaps either of you would like to go, or Steve. I know you had shared some things as well. So if anyone would like to share what they're doing, that'd be great.
Yeah, I don't mind sharing. Janine, we I think one of the things that we do really well with our training is, one, it's very thorough. So we not only make sure that our staff understand the importance of driving a vehicle safety and making sure that it's safe before they leave and before they put any members in it. The other thing that we do, all of our staff, whether you're a driver or a peer support or a therapist or the receptionist, they all go through the same training in order to understand how to better serve our members. And so we don't just hope that our staff are going to be kind and customer service oriented. We actually make sure that they understand our expectations and what our members expect as a staff. So I think it helps our members feel a little bit more cared for and a little safer and valued while we're doing that transportation. I think the other thing that we do really well is we don't just rely on us to transport our members around. Our goal is to help our members become independent individuals. So we teach them about the different community resources available for transportation, whether it's the local bus route or if there's other NEMTs that are available, things like that. So it's not that we don't want to, be able to continue helping people, but literally our goal is to, if we work ourselves out of a job by making everybody independent, then we become unnecessary. That's our goal.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So while you were sharing that, that information about how your end goal, so to speak, right, would be to work yourself out of a job, in creating that self-sufficiency and educating your members on different resources and transportation options that are available. I think there's a kind of a nice opportunity right there, or perhaps a nexus, right, to coordinate efforts. So SunTran and SunVan could potentially partner with you to say, like, how do we get that message out more fully? What tools or resources would be helpful to you to share that? And then also in the same breath, what you were saying about how you do a good job of sharing with your drivers what your members expect. I think kind of being able to share the lens in which you look at those things through, I think that's an opportunity potentially for other organizations to say, where's our opportunity to look at our own clients or our own members with that type of a lens, in order to raise the bar, if you will, on our own training or our own standards on how we meet the needs of the people that we serve. So I think there's some neat opportunities there. Anyone else would like to share either training practices or other best practices that they feel is really their gifting, so to speak? They have some really great strengths. I know, don't know that anyone from Savvy is on, but I know Savvy has a very distinct element related to their training practices. And I want to say that both Easter Seals Blake Foundation and Catholic Community Services have some unique pieces as well. And then, of course, I'm going to pick on Jim, if he can even hear me, from the Beacon Group, because they're actually working with SunTran and their on-demand services for a coordination opportunity for meeting the needs of a job fair on April 26th that's coming up, the Dream Job Fair. So that's very exciting. And so we'll be interested to see how that goes. But I see that Mandy Hendricks and Jessica are on the call, and I don't know that I had an opportunity to welcome Mandy. So I'm going to say morning to Mandy. And on that, Mandy, if you want to introduce yourself and if there's anything you'd like to share about your organization, feel free to do so.
Good morning. Thank you, Janine. My name is Mandy Hendricks. I'm a director at Easter Seals Blake Foundation. And, we provide a wide variety of services, just like most of you other agencies, with a lot of transportation. And we do a lot of transportation here in Pima, and then also up in the Seago region and Graham-Greenlee counties, we do some on-demand transportation, more kind of public transportation up there. And I know that I'd been talking to Janine about really trying to increase coordination efforts, because I know that it's an area that our agency can be a bit better about. And I know, in years past, we've had signed MOUs with other agencies, and I think it's been a long time since we've signed an MOU. So I think it would be great if we could do that again, to be able to, provide transportation to each other's members. If there's an emergency or a vehicle breakdown or things like that. I know insurance wise, it's been a little difficult, kind of getting around sharing vehicles. But definitely, being able to support each other in driving members. And then along with that, I just want to let everybody know that we do have past trainers with our organization. And so if you're ever in need of someone needing past training, please don't hesitate to let us know, and we would be happy to train your drivers. And, at some point, maybe even just getting out a calendar, and offering it every so often, if that would be beneficial to this group.
Wow, thank you, Mandy. I appreciate that. I know Town of Oro Valley and Hope have expressed interest in the past as well about what are some opportunities to further driver training efforts to include past training, but start to also perhaps incorporate some other elements such as like their accident prevention program and their driver assessment tools that they have, and making those training components available to anyone who would like to attend. So that's definitely something that we can, look to put on a future agenda, or create kind of like a subgroup, if you will, to kind of help champion that. So definitely something we can perhaps look forward to, maybe before the weather gets really hot. But if not, if we don't make it to that marker in time, perhaps we can plan for something in the early fall when the weather cools off again. So definitely something to keep in mind. And I appreciate you sharing the heart for wanting to bring back MOU discussions, if you will. And so I know not everyone in this working group is in a place where they can't, or a posture where they can have it more open to the public. And then of course, insurance can sometimes be a barrier with regarding MOUs, but I believe that there probably are still a few agencies within our working group that say, you know what, we probably can at least take a look at that and see what's promising, and kind of perhaps work towards that. So we can talk offline and see what agencies might want to take a closer look at that. So thank you. All right, who else would like to kind of share any best practices or strengths that they've identified? It's really kind of your opportunity to kind of brag about your organization. So I'm encouraging you to not be shy and share a little bit about the things that you've really worked hard on and doing and excelling in for many moons. So anyone else?
I can go, Janine. This is Jessica with Catholic Services. We have been putting, we do have some specialty in deaf and deafblind services, and provide transportation for our clients in that category. And we have been putting together, I think I might have mentioned this before, a series of trainings and videos for etiquette while working, transporting, and kind of being around individuals who are deaf or deafblind, and especially in the area of transportation. And we want to make sure that it's available for anybody here in this group to either attend a training, or we're feeling more or less like we're going to put some videos together to share. So that way you guys have resources and you can share that video as well. It might be a little bit easier to have it that way, but we certainly wouldn't mind also talking with anybody in the group who has questions about transporting individuals who are deaf or deafblind.
Thank you so much. And I'm going to probably bring what you just shared back up into the fold again, because as we look at the agenda, there's a couple other talking points beyond the determining of strengths or best practices, and it's rooted in kind of the shared learning arm of this. And so I'm going to probably ask for you to kind of bring some certain elements back into the conversation. So, all right. Well, thank you so much for everyone who was willing to be open and kind of share some of the things that they feel are their strengths. I think through being very open about what our shared strengths are, we'll be able to kind of chip away at what are some of the low-hanging fruit, right, for us to kind of link arms and make a difference in some of the regional needs that have been identified. And if we were to take a quick look at our coordinated plan, where it does outline a lot of the opportunities for coordination and regional needs, some of the things that really stand out, so to speak, are, you know, the needs within rural areas. And I know Franny's on the call, and I think Patricia's on the call, and there's a variety of agencies that serve in a rural capacity, and they could speak to that more fully. But within that, you know, the need for transportation services to medical appointments, counseling, of course, any type of case management related appointments, and then of course, even employment opportunities, et cetera, worship services. I mean, it really starts to cascade out in terms of the different needs, and just being very aware of the needs for those with a physical disability or any type of cognitive disability, hearing disability, visual impairment. And then even going as far as taking a look at those with like a self-care limitation or a self-care disability. And so typically those are people that might have some challenges either dressing or bathing or just moving around in their own home. And so if you take a look at people that have kind of like a self-care disability, if you will, if that is part of their story, then how does that translate into other challenges that they might be facing when they try to gain access to transportation services? How are people going to meet their needs? And so when we look at the coordinated plan, we also look at our population and demographics, from low income all the way through different age-related demographics. And so when we look at an aging population, there is an awareness of people that might start to show early signs of cognitive decline or just different types of mobility challenges, right? Instability, balance issues, et cetera. And so, or even hearing loss or visual loss due to macular degeneration or any other type of diagnosis. But how do we meet people where they are at currently with those kind of challenges? And then also how do we meet them where they are long-term as their needs might change? And how do we meet the needs of those that, you know, are their caretakers or support them, whether it be a case manager or a family member, et cetera. So just being, you know, very aware of those pieces when we say addressing regional needs, what does that look like? And what is the need for not just the member, but for their loved one or whoever else might be supporting them? So as we kind of look at our best practices and training and resources and trying to coordinate those resources, those are some different lenses that we have an opportunity to take a look at things through and say, okay, where can we be stronger? Where can we meet the needs of more people to allow people to have greater accessibility to transportation services in our region? So on that note, I'd like to spend the next chunk of time kind of in two buckets, and that would be what are some opportunities for us to coordinate these different resources, and how do we create perhaps a culture of shared learning? So you know, earlier in the discussion, you know, I kind of picked on Rhett a little bit, and I said, can you share a little bit about what you're doing for your hiring practices? right? And so there's some things that they're likely excelling in and have learned in their journey of hiring that could be shared with the group. And as we look at our own hiring practices to hire and retain talent and attract talent, what does that look like? So that would be, a coordination of resources. In the same breath, Jessica Winchester from Catholic Community Services was saying about the different training tools that they have put together and how they're creating videos and a willingness to share those with other people within the working group. So my question to you is, what are your thoughts about the coordination of these different types of resources? What do you see as being kind of that low-hanging fruit, like the biggest need that you think that we have? Or what is the low-hanging fruit of what do we have first and foremost to kind of bring to the table to have a set of resources to coordinate with? And then with that, what are your thoughts about kind of creating a culture within our working group and of course beyond of shared learning, right? So Mandy Hendricks, for example, she had shared that, they have past trainers and a willingness to figure out how can we make the most of those opportunities with her past training certified individuals. What does that look like, and who else has some other things that they'd like to bring into the fold? So I'm going to open up the floor again for people to kind of share what they think about coordination of resources and what things they might have to bring to the table, so to speak. And then, of course, thoughts around a culture of shared learning, if you will. So I'm going to let anyone chime in. Don't have to necessarily feel the need to raise your hand using the little prompts on Zoom, although it is helpful. But I know a few of you have some really great opportunities. So if I don't see anybody right away volunteer some information, I might just call on some people because I know you're just being really shy. Okay, I'm gonna pick on Town of Aurora Valley. So so Mike, I know you and John have done an amazing job of sharing resources with people within the working group when it comes to either like pre and post trip inspections, maintenance plans, et cetera, but also you've gone above and beyond and have presented it as to some of the things that you've incorporated into your practices on a day-to-day to include driver training, et cetera. So I'm going to ask you to kind of share a little bit of those things and perhaps share what you think might be some of that low-hanging fruit that I had spoke to earlier.
Okay. So our maintenance is probably one thing that we really go above and beyond. Kind of out of a forced way of doing it. When I first started, I started in June of years ago, and the first summer I spent many times on the side of the road because our vehicles broke down. We didn't really have much of a maintenance plan, and what we had didn't really get followed. So John, who started just before I did in the same year, we put together this plan. And so we got more of a repetitive preventative maintenance, and we stuck with that. So in doing that, and which also included the lift preventative maintenance, although it's a cost, it's still better than sitting on the side of the road waiting for the tow truck to get there, or passengers getting moved all over the place trying to figure out how to get people to where they need to go. So we put together this maintenance plan with the lift maintenance, and that has proven to be time saver, time is money. And then also it helped on the cost of maintenance anyway, just because we're catching it when they're doing it, or a basic oil change. So we're not, drivers not going out to the vehicles and, oh, I've got a flat tire now. Or they get a flat tire because, nobody's looking at the tread depth or, something like that. So we put together a maintenance plan to prevent all the on-road breakdowns.
Great, thank you. Can you just give a couple quick insights to people that might be trying to get some context for like some examples or some things that you put into that?
Well, like our pre-trip, or actually pre and post trips. So a couple of things that you have to make it kind of enticing for the employees to actually do. So you have your pre-trip inspection, you have your list of things, okay, check this. But if nobody's checking to make sure that they're being checked, then it's just a piece of paper they fill out and throw in a box. So we put an incentive in there in a form of a pre-trip tag. So every once in a while we put a tag on the bus on the stuff you're normally supposed to check. Like you lift the hood and right there on the top of the manifold or whatever is this pre-trip tag. Well, if you bring that tag in before you leave, well, you get a $5 gift card. So that puts more of the onus on the employees to actually do this. So that's one thing that we've done. As far as accidents and new damage found on vehicles, we want everybody to report everything that happens. The tree scratches, the scratch up the side of your bus, you can't help it. Maybe you can. So if they let us know, we can reach out to the parking lots or the houses that we go to and ask if we can have them trim up the trees so we're not scratching up our vehicles. So all that kind of stuff helps them take an ownership of the vehicle and hopefully an ownership in making sure it's continually running. So when it's their turn to use this next vehicle, their inspection is just that, an inspection. They're not trying to, having to clean it all out or having to, fix something just to be able to use the vehicle. So the pre and post trip inspections are very important to us to make sure that the next driver can use that vehicle without having to go through hoops to use it.
Very good. Thank you so much for sharing. I'm going to call in Franny because I know her hand's up, and I want to give her an opportunity to speak, and then I'm going to kind of circle back around to what Mike had just shared and see if there's anyone else that would like to either kind of share some things that they're doing now come to mind based on what Mike has shared, or even perhaps some questions as a result of what Mike has shared, or just continuing that conversation about what other resources are potentially available to coordinate with, and of course, create that culture of shared learning. So be thinking about that while I'm going to go ahead and ask Franny to go ahead and share what was on her mind. So hi, Franny, good morning. I don't know if she could hear me. Hands up on the screen. All right. Franny, I don't know if you can hear me. I can't hear you if you're trying to speak. All right. Well, we'll try and figure out what's driving that. But Franny, feel free to give me a call after the meeting so we don't lose any to share, or send me an email, whatever works best for you. So able to hear you at the moment. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and open up the floor again to the things I mentioned earlier. Any questions for Mike on what he shared, or anything that you would like to bring to the discussion, given what Mike has shared and what I had encouraged earlier about coordination of resources, and of course that culture of shared learning. So go ahead. Anyone like to share? I'm just going to remind everyone to put their phones on mute if possible while at the meeting, just so that we don't have any background noise. Thank you. All right. So now that I asked everybody to put their mics on mute, no one's going to talk. But if there's anyone that would like to share about coordination of resources or that culture of shared learning, please feel free to chime in.
This is Mike with Oro Valley.
Hi, Mike.
With all that information about accidents and maintenance prevention and all that stuff, we still have accidents. Is there, for everybody, is there your favorite place for body damage repair? Anybody have any contacts for that?
This is Steve from Hope. We've had good luck with Fix Auto over on 22nd.
So that's a good pain point. So would there be value in us creating something, us meaning the working group, creating something where it's a kind of a document, if you will, where people can say, here's where we've had some success in working with different agencies for different things, whether it be body shop repairs or maintenance or whatever the case may be. If that would be helpful, then we can make sure it's shared with everyone. And then we can kind of update the document potentially as time moves on, but also it frees up some time for what we have left on the agenda. Would that be helpful to everyone?
Janine, this is Carmen with Catholic Community Services.
Hi, Carmen. Sorry,
Hi.
I didn't see you join. I apologize.
That's all right. I joined a little late. I apologize.
You're still welcome. We're glad you're here.
I think that would be a really good idea. One of our issues, I know there's a few places in town that repair lifts, but, and I don't know if other people experience this, but our lifts break all the time. I think if we had just a vendor contact list that we could work from, and maybe collaborate on, it would be really helpful for me. When you're trying to find somebody to work on one of these vehicles, and especially when you have a fleet, it can be a daunting task.
Okay. So I might call on you or Mike to potentially help champion this so that
Sure.
Yeah, so that I can get your input on thoughts on it and allow you to kind of own that versus myself at PAG owning something like that. But we'll talk through it and see what makes sense. But I just wanted to at least throw it out there and see if before we dedicate any resources or time to it as a collective group, make sure first that would there be value in it. So it sounds like, at least from a few people so thus far, there could be some value in that. So we can definitely take a look at that.
Yeah, I would totally be open to that. Finding people we can trust to work on our vehicles and do it thoroughly, but without fleecing us that's an important aspect of
that trust
management.
Trust is a big one because when I started with Catholic Community Services, they had been taking all of our vehicles, the 5310 and others, to a place, and they were absolutely being ripped off. And when we changed providers, that place went out of business. They were staying in business because of our fleet for Tucson. And, every time we took a vehicle in there, it was $1,500. And, I don't know a lot about cars, but I know oil changes are cheaper than that. And so trust is a big deal. And I think if more people are using it and more people are talking about it, it will elevate the trust level for me anyway.
Thank you, Carmen. I appreciate you sharing that. Well, we have naturally created the perfect segue to our next item on the agenda, which is maintaining assets in a state of good repair. So I will definitely send out an email about kind of seeing what makes sense to put together potentially a tool for sharing information about lift repairs and other types of maintenance to include body work, et cetera. And so we can champion that offline. I've made a note of that. So we're going to just go ahead and segue to the next item on the agenda. So if we can go ahead and put the next slide up for maintaining assets in a state of good repair, that would be awesome. Thank you. So again, in alignment with the goals outlined in the coordinated plan, making sure that we're good stewards of funding that's been awarded through the 5310 program is always top of mind. And sometimes those funds come in the form of a vehicle, right? So we want to make sure that we're maintaining them in a state of good repair. And of course, that's also in alignment with ADOT's guidelines as per their guidebook. So one of the things I wanted to kind of take a look at is essentially four things, right? So the first is annual inspections. That is an ADOT requirement for everyone to have vehicles inspected annually, and that is a requirement up until time the vehicle is what they call disposed of, right, where it's no longer assigned to you, or I guess you could say if you transferred to another organization, it'd be another example where it's not your responsibility, but for the most part it's up until the time it's disposed of, right? So annual inspections are a requirement, and if you know anything about me in the last few months, you probably have recognized an uptick in the amount of emails that you've seen from me about not only are we doing what we need to do with regard to annual inspections, but are we communicating everything that we need to communicate to ADOT to ensure that they are aware of where you are in the process. So for example purposes, if their spreadsheet says that X vehicle has not yet been inspected, that is a true statement because they don't have anything to suggest otherwise that the vehicle has been inspected. They don't have the inspection form. They don't have a sheet, so to speak, saying that it has a clean bill of health, right? But what they don't know is that you've scheduled the appointment. You're just waiting for a calendar date to move forward so that you actually can bring the vehicle on that said date and time to get inspected. So how do we kind of move the needle in terms of making sure that we're communicating well with ADOT so that they know not only are you making every effort to be in compliance and getting these vehicles maintained, but also that they have a measure that says, okay, they said that it was going to get inspected on this date. So this is kind of a new marker in time for us to potentially follow up and see if that inspection actually came to fruition. You know, did it get rescheduled, or was there a failure in the inspection, meaning that there's going to need to be some repairs done? And if so, when will those be done in alignment with what the guidebook states for the timeline to get those done? So when we're talking about annual inspections and our responsibility not only to get those done and to communicate well, I want to also make sure that we are communicating well with ADOT any challenges that we are experiencing in upholding that responsibility. So if there's challenges with the scheduling of inspections, if there's challenges in the way that the results of the inspection are documented on that inspection sheet, where you end up with more questions than answers, or you know, a need to get additional clarity, or perhaps you know, we all make mistakes, right? So sometimes, you know, a failure happens because of an oversight or a misinterpretation of something. But if your vehicle fails for a reason that's not quite warranted, that can be stressful, it can be frustrating, but we also want to make sure that if we're bringing a concern like that to someone's attention, that they have confidence that it's not an isolated incident, like it's only happening once every 100th moon, or is it happening a lot, right? So if it's happening a lot, the only way that I can know whether or not it's happening a lot is if we have data, right? We have to be able to measure it. So being able to have confidence that you would share with me running into some challenges so I can better support you as an individual agency, but also you as a collective working group would really be helpful. So this is kind of an opportunity for us to say, what are some things that we as individual organizations are doing well in ensuring that our vehicles are getting inspected in a timely fashion? What are some things that we're doing well in communicating with ADOT when is getting ready to get inspected, but that calendar date just hasn't manifested yet? And also, what are some things that we're doing well to communicate with ADOT that says, yes, the vehicle is inspected, yes, it needs some repairs, and yes, we are addressing those? Because I think we can all learn from each other in that respect. Like, oh, I never thought to include this information when I communicate with ADOT, or I never thought to include this when I'm communicating with our mobility manager. That would be helpful. We should incorporate that. In the same breath, what are some things that have been a little challenging, have a little bit of frustration to them? And I want to be kind because it's a complicated process. And so, we don't want to beat people up unintentionally for anything. So we want to be careful in how we articulate our concerns. But if there are some concerns, I would want you to bring them to me, and we don't necessarily need to discuss them in a full scope today on this call, because it could take perhaps a little bit more time than what we have allotted for this section of the agenda. But I do want to make sure that if there are some things that I could support you well, that bring them to my attention so we can address them. So let's start with the positive first and think about things that are being done well with respect to annual inspections. And then after we tackle that component, I do want to spend some time on the pre and post trip inspections. And so for those that did apply for funding this grant cycle, you know that one of the things that you had to send me was a copy of your pre and post trip inspection processes. So those should be somewhat still top of mind and fresh in your memory. So and because you use them often, they're also always top of mind. So that will be the one thing that I'll want to discuss about what are opportunities to kind of standardize, if you will, the process, making sure that everybody is elevated in the way that they take a look at their pre and post trip inspections, and then to include maintenance plans, because that was another component. So we're going to chip away at that. And then lastly, I want to talk just really briefly about forecasting costs, because one of the great things about having just closed out, so to speak, a grant application cycle, because the window for the application is closed, but there's still some time before preliminary awards, et cetera, is it allows us to kind of hit the reset button, if you will, that says, now what can we do starting today to make sure that come the next grant cycle in 2 years, we're in the best posture possible to be competitive with our grant application and make the most of that opportunity. And I believe that everything that we're talking about right now, all the way up coordination efforts, et cetera, but also in this maintaining assets in a state of good repair, with the pre and post trip inspections, the annual inspections and maintenance plans. If we can really understand what our true costs are and be able to forecast costs around that, but also the costs of vehicles, be in a better posture all the way around, whether it be for planning for the grant application in terms of what you might write, but also the financial responsibility that comes with maintaining the vehicles, but also any local match requirements. So we'll spend just a little bit of time on forecasting costs, but I do want to spend the bulk of our time on annual inspections, the pre and post trip inspections, and the maintenance plans. So we'll start with the good stuff first. So what are some things that we feel like we're doing really well and that others might be able to learn from one another? with regard to how they champion their annual inspections. Because I know some of you have really large fleets, and that takes on a life of its own, so to speak, comparative to an organization that might just have 1, 2, or 5 vehicles. So for those of you that are on either end of the continuum, your contributions are equally important. So feel free to share what you do well, because there's always something someone can learn from one another. So I'll just open up the floor.
Hi, Janine. This is Steve with Hope.
Hey, Steve.
I think one of the things that we do well is, we have the pre and post inspection, but we also have a monthly inspection that we do that's a little bit more in depth, and we have specific people at each site. Their job is to go out, make sure that that vehicle is inspected that month, and from everything, making sure that our fire extinguisher is certified and up to date. Checking the fluid, looking for leaks, checking the interior, making sure that it's safe and there's nothing that needs addressing. The other thing I think we do really well is once something is brought to our attention, we pull that vehicle out of service until we get it addressed. One of the things that we absolutely never want to happen is to have somebody stuck on the side of the road with a van full of members, when it's 110 degrees out or 35 degrees out. We don't want it to happen ever, but because Arizona has this wonderful extreme weather, our goal is to do as much work preventatively as possible, but then as soon as we notice something, address it so that we reduce the number of incidents where we have people stuck on the side of the road.
So can you help everyone kind of understand a little bit about what things, if any, are different in what gets done on the monthly inspection comparative to what's done for your pre and post trip? Is the scope broader? Is it about the same, but it's just like a second set of eyes? Or can you speak to that a little bit?
It's actually much broader. So we originally had this huge 3-page pre and post, but when you've got an 8-hour day and we're getting clients to and from appointments and groups and things like that, we really found that became people just weren't doing it, or they checked the boxes and we knew it wasn't happening. So we narrowed down the pre and post. And we also use that as a log for mileage, and that allows people to go out, do a quick once over, make sure the vehicle is doing what it needs to do. There's no leaks, or does it look like there's any new damage, and then get them going on their day. The monthly inspection is much more comprehensive. So we actually have it listed out. Have you looked at the interior panels? Are you looking at the headlights? Do the turn signals work? Do the turn signals on the dash work? And that's broken out by line item. It's 2 pages front and back, so it's a little large, but again, it gives us that opportunity to find the problem with a little more scrutiny and then address it before it becomes something that becomes an issue. The other thing that we're doing is we've gotten away from using like Walmart or Jiffy Lube or one of those places to do our oil changes. We take it to an organization or a mechanic that we trust, that we know is going to do a better job. It's more expensive, but they're not just changing the oil and saying, get on your way. They're actually doing a more comprehensive. So we've got that happening. Then we have an annual inspection that we do ourselves on top of what ADOT does. God bless ADOT. They've changed their inspections. They've gone from 10 minutes to 2 hours. So that has changed a lot, and definitely made all of our mechanics happier.
So I think there's value in, knowing that someone's taking a thorough look, at your vehicle, like you were saying, it's not just oil change and then, you're on your way with perhaps a little less confidence as did they look at anything else or bring to light anything that you wish you would know right in advance. And obviously there's a cost associated with that, right? And then also from inspections, right? If we want to have a very thorough inspection so that we know what is required to keep our vehicles in a state of good repair so that we don't have them break down during, especially the more volatile times temperature wise. It also takes, more time to go through the vehicle, right? It's not going to take 10 minutes or perhaps 20. It could take longer, unfortunately. So there's always going to be that balancing act, right? But I think with that balancing act, it's important to understand, what is the value from investing those additional dollars, or what's the value of investing that additional time, whether that additional time comes through ADOT's inspection process, your own internal inspection process, or that of a mechanic. So I think there's some good talking points there. The piece that I was curious about is your annual inspection. Well, it's two things. The annual inspection that's on top of what ADOT does at their inspection station, if I'm hearing you correctly. So for the benefit of those that are on the call today, I know not all take their vehicles to ADOT for their annual inspection, because you do have the option to take it to another entity. You just don't get reimbursed for that, the cost of that inspection, right? That's kind of the trade-off. So for those that are getting the annual inspections done, regardless if it's at ADOT or, like a third party, if you will, can you speak a little bit to like what you feel your annual inspection does differently, or perhaps above and beyond what is done through your experience, whether in the past you took it to ADOT or in the past you took it to a third party? Do they use the same checklist, because there is a checklist of inspection elements on the annual inspection that ADOT requires? Are they using that same one, or is it that one plus, an additional layer of elements? And, what are some of those elements for the annual inspection? I know you spoke to what are some of the inherent differences for your monthly as it compares to the pre and post trip. I was just curious what differences, if any, for the annual you do.
Well, we use the ADOT inspection sheet that they provide, and we actually give that to our mechanics. What I like about using the mechanics versus ADOT is it goes in, they inspect it, and then they'll give us a call and say, hey, this needs to be addressed and that needs to be addressed. And we can actually have it done and then pick up the vehicle versus, you go to ADOT, then you have to take the vehicle and have it done. So there's some time savings that happen with that. And again, I'm glad ADOT doesn't charge us, but you never know what you're going to get. We had a vehicle go in the other day and it didn't pass because there was a light that was too dim in the interior. When we got in the vehicle, we took the dimmer switch and we raised it back up. That fixed that situation. So it's, I actually have more faith in the mechanics doing the annual ADOT inspections than I do in ADOT. I don't know that it's different because we're using that ADOT form that they provide, that you can pull off the website.
Okay, so the scope of things that are being looked at is the same, is just depending on a mechanic's approach or what have you, right?
Yeah, prior to, well, I guess about 4 months ago when they changed the ADOT inspections, I would take it to the mechanic and they would tell us what the millimeters were on our brake pads. Mm-hmm. That didn't happen at ADOT. ADOT just checks whether it's good or bad. So I can make a determination, if they send me back and the pads are at like 3 millimeters or 4 millimeters, I'm like, okay, maybe it's time we change the pads now. Let's not wait for something to happen.
Okay. I'm just curious for those that are on the call that are taking their vehicles to ADOT for the annual inspection. Is that something that's kind of across the board that you don't necessarily get the documentation about for brake pads as an example? What millimeter they're at in comparative to the standards. You have like a marker in time of, how long the brake pads could theoretically still last for, or when you should plan for a replacement. Are you not getting that level of detail, or do you typically get it, but every once in a while someone misses writing that down? I'm just curious if anybody has some
Janine, this
insight
is
on that.
Mike with Oro Valley.
Uh-huh.
For our inspections, that when we take it to our mechanics, we use Brake Max and Big Brand.
Mhm.
But what we did is we went through and made a list of items that they have to check and write down. So it has the tread depth and brake list, the brake millimeters that you're talking about. So we wrote down, okay, you have to have this information. You have to check this.
Mhm.
So they get that and they return that to us every single time. And so when we go down and pick it up, our maintenance person, he's not a mechanic, but he does our maintenance, but he studies that with them before he picks it up. Says, what is this? What is that? So if they write down anything, you check your serpentine belt, it's starting to crack. They go look at it. So before they even leave, they can determine whether, okay, this is coming right back, or it's staying there to change it, or everything's good and you bring it back. So
Okay.
we wrote out our list that they have to inspect.
Interesting. I was curious if anyone does a similar approach with the ADOT inspection stations. Is anyone saying, okay, before we leave there, we want to, take a look at, like your example about, look, can we see the condition of the serpentine belt, or can we see what the specs are that remain on our brake pads and make sure that they're noted? Is anyone having those types of discussions with ADOT, whether they lead that or ADOT is leading it? I'm just curious. So it sounds like most of these examples are rooted in kind of third party inspection processes. So I'm just curious what it looks like when you go to an ADOT facility, and if anyone's having a similar experience.
But yeah, again, with Oro Valley, yeah, we started doing that when they changed their inspection format, I guess, because they were writing up stuff that I was like, wait a minute, just like what you're just talking about, the light was too dim. Where you go over there and adjust the switch, and all of a sudden the light's working. We had wipers not working. We had the door frame around the lift was loose. A whole bunch of different stuff. You're like, wait a minute, if the door frame is loose, doesn't that mean the bus is falling apart? Well, it ended up being the cosmetic that covers the frame.
Oh, right. So clarification of terms, right?
Correct. Yeah. So it's stuff like that. Now we haven't, our next ones are coming up due in June. So yeah, we'll go through that again. And what we've had to do is just drop the bus and pick it up the next day because it was taking so long. We can't have a driver sitting there waiting for it to get done. So now we've changed everything on how we do it, drop it, go pick it up the next day.
Okay. And I know for some that are in more rural areas, drive time to get to some of the inspection stations is more taxing, and to be able to make two different trips would be hard. So I know sometimes in the rural areas, they tend to use a third party, and they might be using a very similar approach to what you characterized. But I'm just curious if anyone else has any insights or pearls of wisdom, so to speak, that they've incorporated into the annual inspection, so that across the board we have some pieces of information to learn from, but also arguably some takeaways to follow up with ADOT about, how can we get some consistency in, how things get documented on that inspection report, so that it's becomes even more value add than it is right now. So, and with the ASTA conference coming up shortly, and the statewide mobility managers meeting being held in that span of time. It's a great opportunity for me to be able to bring these things to the right people's attention. So I encourage you to either share it now or send me an email or call me and chat about some of those items, because I really would like to make sure that this is something that take a closer look at, because maintaining assets in a state of grid repair is a requirement. It's a compliance requirement. And so that we can work with ADOT in ensuring that we're doing what we need to do, but in the same breath, they're aware of some things that we could all do better to further that initiative. I think is always good information to share. So maintenance plans is kind of embedded in this, and I know a lot of you have shared your maintenance plans with me. I think all of you actually have your maintenance plans with me, and I'm thankful for that. I'd like to see what are the consistent patterns across the board on all those maintenance plans, and see what I feel is what kind of separates one maintenance plan from the other, and bring those into later discussions about how do we kind of help to elevate each other on how we do maintenance plans, how we develop them so that everyone can be strong in their own right. I recognize that not all agencies have the same fleet size, not all agencies have the same composition, if you will, within their fleets. Some of you are heavy in the minivan space, if you will, and others are more in the definitely we're a cutaway type organization, and then everything in between. And then I know some of you have a lot more dedicated staff and fleet managers, et cetera, that are tied to overseeing this, and other organizations do not have that level of support internally. You have to look externally for support. And so I want to make sure that we acknowledge that, but if we have opportunities to help each other in this space, it serves us well as a region, it serves us well individually, because I think one of the things that always happens when you teach someone else something is it opens your eyes to things that you didn't see before. It refreshes your memory on a few things. The example that I give often is, go teach your teenage daughter or son how to drive, and watch how quickly you recall how much of the Arizona state, guidelines, so to speak, for rules of the road you have forgotten over the years, and which ones that you become acutely aware that, oh, I'm not very consistent in upholding that one, right? Like, start to see your own flaws very quickly. So I think by going through the process of training someone or sharing your own checklists or maintenance plans, you too can have your eyes open to like, wow, these are things that we are really doing well. And I'm thankful for the reminder. Now that I'm thinking about it, I have some other ideas to make it even stronger. But also in the same spirit, your eyes might be open to some opportunities through that discussion that says, we never really thought about that. I'm grateful for that question. We have some work to do on ours to make it better, or we can use your insights or your talents to help us strengthen that. And I know most recently, a lot of people were sharing different documents like pre and post trip inspections and even maintenance plans, and other organizations were already able to kind of hit the ground running with some newfound insights. So I'd like to kind of keep that momentum going, but build upon it. So maintenance plans, if anyone has anything that they would like to share above and beyond some of the pieces that we've somewhat dabbled in already through the pre and post trip inspection and annual inspection. I know at some point it kind of overlaps. So if there's anything that anyone would like to speak to with regard to their maintenance plans, challenges, strengths, anything in that space would be good. Okay, I'm gonna reserve the little bit of time that we would have used for talking about maintenance plans, just to be able to touch a little bit on the forecasting of costs, but then I want to spend the remainder of our time on the next item on the agenda, which is preparing for site visits. So let's talk about forecasting costs. So like I said earlier, we're kind of like in this unique posture that says, okay, in 2 years, right, roughly the cycle will be here again for those that want to apply for funding. And much like it's probably fresh in your mind right now, having come out of a grant cycle, all the different layers and pieces of information that go into that process, and the calculations, the understanding, the recognition of what your fleet is comprised of today, what it might be comprised of in the future in terms of use and mileage, and then also just your own recognition of what your needs might be in a couple years, right? And in terms of vehicle type, et cetera. But also planning financially for a local match, right? So as vehicle costs increase or decrease, local match is gonna fluctuate as well. And then with that, much like I think Carmen had shared, you know, there are some different challenges that come with different vehicle selections. So if historically most of your vehicles, for example, have had ADA accessibility, but through the form of a ramp, and this is your first season, if you will, with lift, or maybe you've had a vehicle with a lift for a while, but it was during the time where COVID had really impacted a lot of organizations in a way that we're not seeing the impact quite as much now. Maybe you weren't using your lift as much. So in the next 2 years, you'll probably potentially really see what your true costs are for maintaining those lifts or even repairing them. And so being able to be really intentional about tracking costs and using the data that you have to forecast future costs will really serve you well in planning for the next grant application. So some things that I would encourage you to be thinking about are, what are the data points that we're currently collecting, we as an individual organization? What are we currently collecting to put us in a good posture for? What are some of the pieces of data that we're not collecting that we probably should be, and how do we go about doing that? And then thirdly, what are the questions that come to mind that say, you know what, this is all new to me, or we don't really have someone that's, you know, dedicated within our organization for this, so I don't even know where we would start on calculating some of these things. How can I learn from some other organizations? So who is sitting there saying to themselves, I would really need to lean on someone, but maybe on the other side of the coin, you're the organization says, you know what, I can see there's probably going to be some people that are going to need to lean in on support from someone else, and we could come alongside them and say, hey, here are the things that we look at, here's how we go about doing it. If we could share that information with you in terms of how we do it, our approach, our methodology, and that helps you, you know, we'd be glad to coordinate on that front. So give some thoughts around that, because one of the things that I would like to know is, you know, who's all in on that in terms of sharing resources, but also who has a need, but then also what are the things that we are able to collect well, and what are the things that we're struggling. And so if there's an opportunity to support you in those efforts, whether individually or collectively, then I'm in a posture to do so. So seriously give some thought to that, because now is a great time to already start planning for the next grant cycle. And I know some of you are still taking a deep breath after going through that, and the thought of 2 years from now doing it again, you're like, I don't even want to think about it right now. But now really is the time to start planning for it. So end on that note for that particular topic of maintaining assets in a state of good repair. Then we're going to move to the next topic on the agenda, which is preparing for site visits. So we're going to go ahead and put that slide up, preparing for site visits. And when we talk about preparing for site visits, as that slide comes up on the screen here shortly, again, it's all in alignment with the goals, if you will, that are outlined in the PAG Public Transit Human Services Coordinated Transportation Plan. So if we look at those pieces, there's kind of like a common theme, if you will. So some of those are like vehicle use and reporting, vehicle maintenance, driver training and safety, and of course, the financial management component. So I'm going to keep going with the agenda, even though item number 5 on the agenda isn't quite showing up on the screen yet. But once item 5 on the agenda for preparing for site visits shows up on the screen, you'll know why the slide deck changed. So I'm just going to keep going because I want to be respectful of everyone's time. There we go. We got it. Preparing for site visits. So, so like I was saying, there's basically 4 elements, if you will, that we would want to take a look at. And so vehicle use and reporting, vehicle maintenance, driver training and safety, and financial management. So at first glance, if you will, if those bullet points were on the slide, you can see there's like kind of a theme here, right? So when we started this conversation, we were talking a lot about coordination, and there was discussions about MOUs. There were some discussions about, leaning into that and how can we perhaps take a second look at that, and acknowledging how each organization's kind of in a different posture to be able to potentially embrace that, but it's something we can still work towards. So with that, it's acknowledging how vehicles are used. In the same breath, we also have talked about how in every organization, you're meeting the needs of different people for different reasons. You have different clients, members, etc. So those vehicles get used to meet the needs in different ways. Perhaps some of you are serving very public facing individual or groups of individuals, right? So where you take people can be in a variety of spaces. And then others, perhaps based on your nature of who you serve, very client-centric, member-centric, perhaps it's just heavily rooted in very specific types of appointments. So the vehicle use is going to look differently. But then how do we capture that data and make sure that we are reporting it? Because much like in the working group, the Coordinated Mobility Program through ADOT, the guidebook is what I meant to say, it speaks very clearly of the expectation to do your quarterly reports. And so the quarterly reports are directly tied to awards that you've received in the past. So if you received a vehicle, you are going to be speaking to specific information that's related to the use of the vehicle. In the same breath, if you were awarded operating funds, you would be speaking to specific elements that are related to operating expenses. So one of the things that I want to make sure is clear is that if you haven't revisited the guidebook recently, I would strongly encourage you to do so that you know what the expectations are, but especially if you've had any staff turnover, changing in roles, or like your scope of responsibility has shifted, that everyone's on equal footing. In the same breath, it sets you up to be in a good posture that if ADOT were to come out with a new guidebook, because they do update it, you already kind of have a good sense for what the guidebook has been, so that when they do make those changes, your ability to recognize what the differences are between the old version and the updated version, if you will, is much easier, right? It's a much less steep of a climb, if you will, right, in your level of understanding that you have to master. So I encourage you to do that. One of the things is that pay attention to the quarterly reporting, when it's due, and what is expected of you, and making sure that you acknowledge that if you have a vehicle that was funded through $5310, even if it's from way back and it's off lien, however you want to phrase it, that you are still meeting the expectation to submit the quarterly report. So just making sure that your reporting is accurate and it's timely, and the guidebook does spell out the timeframes for the quarterly reports and when they're due. And as we were talking about the grant application cycle, probably very familiar with the different elements of the scoring rubric. And within that, your ability to be in compliance with the program is one of the things that is evaluated. So the better you are in doing your reporting, keeping your vehicles in a state of good repair, et cetera, is all going to serve you well. So vehicle use and reporting, also on that note, having a strong understanding of how your vehicles are used or will be used also serves you well for grant applications. So the next part, for vehicle maintenance, we've spent a lot of time on vehicle maintenance and pre and post trip inspections and kind of leaning into how we can serve each other well with that. But vehicle maintenance, making sure they're in a state of good repair, is always at the forefront of ADOT's mind. So when you take a vehicle out of service for the right reasons, right? There is a definite reason for when vehicles should be taken out of service, but making sure that you're meeting the guidelines for the time frame in which you need to get the vehicle repaired within to put it back into service. So what you don't want to have happen is you take a vehicle out of service and then you don't get it repaired within the time constraints that ADOT puts forth in their guidebook. But then on top of not doing it within that time frame, not communicating the why for a delay. So always encourage you to communicate, right? So if you're not sure, I need to take a vehicle out of service based on this example, it's not super clear in the guidebook, this might be kind of a one-off, ask the question. If a vehicle is slotted for repairs based on a failed inspection, but you're still navigating whether or not it should have technically failed before slotting out time to get it fixed, ask the question, make sure that ADOT's aware of it. If you've unearthed that the vehicle has more challenges than what initially you had planned for, and so therefore it take much longer to get it fixed than what's within the guidebook, communicate that to ADOT so that they are aware of where that vehicle sits in its standing within being in or out of service, which helps keep you in compliance, but also they're aware that you are making every effort to keep the vehicle in a state of good repair. So documenting those efforts, being consistent with the way that you communicate, can also serve you well with preparing for site visits. So in that spirit, you may have recalled that I sent a couple of documents, checklists, if you will, that could be helpful to you in preparing for a site visit. And they are checklists that are not necessarily like ADOT checklists, right? They're not quote PAG checklists. They're just checklists in the sense that says, if based on what we know from historical site visits that have happened with other organizations over the years, what are some typical questions that could be asked, and might be asked, or are likely to be asked? And it's not an all-inclusive list, but it does set the tone for you to be thinking, if someone from ADOT came today to do a site visit and they said, today's site visit is about vehicle maintenance, and they were to ask me a particular question regarding preventative maintenance intervals, or whether or not we're meeting or exceeding any manufacturer's minimum requirements, or where do we keep your maintenance schedules or the records? What checklists or forms do you use to track any of your maintenance? Would anyone that in that space be able to answer those questions well? They know the answers to those questions. Would they know where to go to get the information to show it to whoever might be coming to do the site visit? In the same breath, if they were asking questions about your pre and post trip inspection checklist, yes, you have one, but can they speak to it and help answer any questions about how that checklist is utilized, or what happens after something's identified? Can someone speak to it? Can they speak to it well? So it allows you to kind of go into it eyes wide open saying, okay, I have an opportunity here to kind of prepare myself well for a site visit if one were to be scheduled, so that I have time on my side to make sure that if there are any potential gaps in some of the things that might be examined for vehicle maintenance for a site visit, we have an opportunity to address it. But we also have an opportunity to make sure that even our newest of staff or our most seasoned of staff are well versed in the approaches and practices, and we have it documented that we have trained them on those elements. So I'm just encouraging you to take a look at those pieces in preparation for a potential site visit. And I'm going to start with vehicle maintenance because it ties well into a lot of the elements that we've been talking about, right? Maintaining assets of a state of good repair, the annual inspections, et cetera, the pre and post trip. I think it sets us up for a posture to be able to essentially coordinate more resources. And I think there's merit to building a strong foundation on certain things before we try to chip away at some other goals. It's kind of, let's make sure we have a strong foundation before we add to it. So we're going to start with that. And then over time, we will start to look at other elements that are equally important and part of site visits, and they might lend itself more into, which is the next topic that I want to talk about, which is like the driver training and the safety components. And so earlier when we were talking about resources that we can share and best practices rooted in driver training, this is a good opportunity for you to say to yourselves, as we look at our best practice or we look at our current driver training programs, if we were to have a site visit in relationship to that, how would I do in answering those questions? And is my staff or my team in a good posture to be able to answer those as well? The same would go for safety, right? So if you have a safety component, which you should, right? If someone were to come and do a site visits on safety, so let's say they were to ask a question about accident reporting procedures or kits that you have in the vehicle, or who's responsible for any type of like accident investigation, if you will, or the reporting of an accident, any kind of training with like fire extinguishers or disruptive passenger policies, anything in that realm is, just a few of the many examples I probably could give you with regard to safety. But I think Steve had shared about their monthly inspection, or maybe it was even in the annual, where they have a broader scope of things that they look for and try to be very proactive. So I'll use this example as something that might be commensurate with what Steve was sharing. But for example, do all your vehicles contain a fire extinguisher? Do all of them contain a first aid kit? Do all of them have triangular reflective devices? The bodily fluid cleanup kits, things of that nature. All those pieces, all those things that are required of you to have in your kit, and then anything else that you might put in there that's kind of above and beyond. How do you know that all your vehicles have that? So if someone came today to do a site visit and said, all we're here to do is focus on safety, show me that we can have confidence that all your vehicles have these things. Let's go out and take a look at, 3 random vehicles on your fleet and show to me that they all have it. And maybe they have it, maybe they don't. Or show me your records that say that you've been looking to make sure that these vehicles all have it every single day. How do you know that that's true, right? So what's your approach? What's your methodology? In the same breath, vehicle safety equipment, does it get inventory? Does it get inspected? Who's checking to make sure that the fire extinguisher isn't expired? A kit doesn't need to be replaced if it's been opened, all those different elements. Who's responsible for that? Who who champions that, and what's your documentation for those types of elements, who orders the new equipment or the new fire extinguishers, all those pieces, CDL licenses, if your vehicle, I'm sorry, if your organization hires CDL licensed drivers, what's the approach for that? All those different pieces, something to be considering, but also as you look at, it's an opportunity to say, you know what, there's an opportunity here for a training in safety for drivers, or a training in this particular element that I feel we as an organization would need, but perhaps other organizations would need. And maybe we can lean into that and see what the true need is and offer it, more regionally. So, and we could potentially partner with, maybe Tucson Fire, or, other organizations that have some bench strength in certain areas. That's something we obviously can discuss, but those are probably the two that you're going to see from me in upcoming weeks, is some checklists and some reminders in the site visit space with regard to maintenance plans and safety. And my hope is that as we take a closer look at these two checklists, that not only will it serve you well in being prepared for a site visit, but it will open our eyes to opportunities to sharing more resources, and to kind of creating that culture of shared learning. So I'm just going to kind of open it up a little bit about questions about site visits or checklists or preparation around that for the topics that I just mentioned. And then the last element that I want to speak to on the site visit piece is the financial management component. And then, of course, more of like how long you should keep certain documents. What are some guidelines that ADOT has for that, so you can make sure that you're keeping the right documentation for the right span of time. So questions, thoughts about the site visits. If you're an organization that's had a site visit in the past, even if it was many moons ago, if there's anything that you'd like to share, wisdom, insights, experience, lessons learned, I think that would be helpful, because for those that are newer to the program and perhaps have never had a site visit done, it can leave you a little unsettled because you don't really know what to expect. And so I think there's value in being able to kind of talk about those pieces. So I'm going to open up the floor for that. So if anybody would like to share. I think there's like one or two organizations that have had a site visit going probably a few years back, but at least navigated a site visit before. And I know some have gone through audits, which is not on the agenda today, but so we're not going to talk about audits. We're just going to talk about site visits. So if anyone's had a site visit in the past and like to kind of share what they feel like they learned by going through the process, not necessarily saying like, here's where we were weak and here's where we're strong, but just like the overall process, what they learned from going through it would be helpful.
Janine, this is Mike World Valley.
Hi, Mike.
Two things. One, I think we've mentioned or talked about the site visits a couple times.
Yes.
Are you trying to hint that it's coming?
I am not trying to hint.
Okay.
I don't have any foreknowledge of a potential site visit approaching.
Okay.
However, I think the best day to prepare for a site visit is before the announcement of a site visit. So I'm doing my part to say, you know what, let's make sure we all have our houses in order.
Right.
Let's make sure we're establishing a good foundation. And I also know that even if your organization has been a part of the program for a really long time, the person that's championing the program can be brand new. And so I don't want to lose sight of that and think like, oh, Easter Seals Blake Foundation, they've been around forever. They don't need any help. They're good, right? And unbeknownst to me, or because I'm not thinking about it, they have new people on their team and I could be helping support them, right? So, and that's just an example. I'm not really suggesting that they need help or don't need help. It's just an example, right? I just don't want to assume anything. And just because they've been with the program a long time, I want to make sure that my eyes are open to potential needs, whether you've been with the program a really long time or just starting, because I know things can change. I mean, COVID opened our eyes to how quickly things can change and how people suddenly have to wear new hats. And sometimes you lose people for different reasons and you have staffing challenges and it can get complicated quick, right? So, so now that our eyes have been open to those kinds of things, let's make sure that if we have new people on our team or roles have changed, or we've started to do things a little bit differently than we did years ago, you know, do we have the right things in place for a site visit in alignment with any changes that have happened? So, so there's a lot of stuff, if you will, stuff is not the best word choice. There's a lot of components that go into a site visit, right? A lot of topics. So I don't want to bombard you with, 52 checklists. That's an arbitrary number. There's not really that many, but because that would be frightening to get that many all in one email. So we're just going to start with like a 1 or 2, and we're going to build upon those. So the first, I think, that makes sense is the vehicle maintenance and the safety, and arguably some of the financial management. So that's where we're going to start. So, but on the heels of that, there are some expectations in the guidebook for how long you should keep certain pieces of information, how often a site visit takes place conceptually, but also what we call like a self audit versus an actual audit. Okay, so a self audit is more of my terminology, saying it's your opportunity to kind of self inspect, self evaluate in advance of a site visit or an actual audit, right? So what I would encourage you to do is be looking at the different criteria. That was the better word choice instead of stuff, like I said earlier to me. So take a look at some of the different site visit criteria and kind of give yourself an opportunity to say, let's do kind of a self audit, if you will, in this particular area. And what I would encourage you to do is say, for this particular area, I think we should kind of take a look at it on our own accord, hence the self audit, every 6 months. And so what does that look like to do it every 6 months? So if we started it today, then in 6 months we would then to gain or improve upon from that. And who would champion it, right? How do we set that person up for success, that if they're going to champion it next time? Or maybe you might say, you know what, for this particular one, given the fact that we have other pieces that are part of this process, maybe we only do it once a year, right? So I'll give you an example. So vehicle maintenance is something with regard to like preventative and scheduled maintenance, recalls, inspection dates, etc. From a self-audit perspective, you could argue to do it at least every 6 months, or you could argue to do it every year, right? Or anything in between. Those are just examples. But if your Hope, right, and they said that they do their own monthly inspection on top of the ADOT inspection, and then they do their own annual inspection on top of ADOT annual inspection, the date, if you will, or the interval in which they choose to do their own self-audit when it pertains to vehicle maintenance might be different than an organization that doesn't have those practices in place or doesn't have the capacity to do it based on staffing, et cetera, right? So everyone will have to kind of evaluate for themselves what makes sense, but going into eyes wide open and saying, but when are we going to look at it, is like the first the first step, right? Versus not looking at it at all, right? So that would be one. Another opportunity is like in the vehicle equipment maintenance and safety area. And this is more of like the lift repair, lift training, lift maintenance aspect. How often are you doing a self-audit of what are your practices or methodologies specific just to that? And again, it's going to vary. It can vary based on just what your fleet composition is. It can vary based on your staffing. It can vary on a lot of things, right? But how often are you taking a look at how well are you doing with regard to lift maintenance, both proactive and reactive, right? Another example would be vehicle inventory. How well are you doing with keeping your vehicle inventory up to date and accurate in mileage, et cetera, right? Because again, what you do today will help you in future grant cycles in terms of being successful. So if you're maintaining your vehicle inventory lists all throughout the 2 years versus waiting 3 months prior, your stress level comes down. It helps you with your forecasting, helps you with a lot of fronts, but it'll definitely help you with your site visit when they say, let me see your current vehicle inventory list and is it up to date? And what does it look like relative to what the fleet out in your driveway, so to speak, looks like, right? So how often are you kind of self-auditing to say, are we on top of our vehicle inventory list? How do we know that we're actually on top of it? Do we just think that we're on top of it, or do we know with confidence that we're on top of it? And what makes that statement true? So that would be another. Same with driver training. So you might have training records, you might have different resources that you use to train your driver as well. But what is your documentation? What's your evaluation practices? How often do training records get updated? How often do you do refresher training? Like all these different pieces should be things that when you look at the checklist that I will eventually send you in time, right? Because we're going to chip away at it, that you can answer with confidence that you're meeting the expectation. And if someone were to come in and do a site visit commensurate with that particular criteria, you'd be in a good posture to answer those questions well. So, and the last part is, and this is not because it's any less important, but just things like your coordination efforts, right? So when we were leaning into this grant cycle, one of the things you heard me say was, documenting your coordination efforts, because you'll need those for within your grant application, but also they need to be sent to me. And then in your quarterly report spreadsheet, there's that tab for you to document your coordination efforts as you go throughout the year, so that by the time a year unfolds or 2 years unfold, you kind of already have a repository of sorts that says, oh, we've already been tracking everything, versus trying to scratch your head and go, what have we done over the last couple of years? You're bound to miss something, right? So how are you documenting your efforts towards coordination? What efforts have you made? What can you document that demonstrates that you've made some efforts? And what does that look like? So again, back to a self-audit, be asking yourself is it every 3 months we're going to take a look and say, like, okay, how are we doing on our coordination efforts? What have we done? What have we documented? Is it every 6 months you're going to do it? Is it every 9 months? What's your rule of thumb for you to kind of self-audit that? And then with that, the grant application and just compliance in general, there's always the civil rights component, which is very important. Title VI, LEP, limited in English proficiency, and ADA requirements, and then of course EEO and DBE. All those pieces are incredibly important. But from a self-audit perspective, take a look at civil rights, your civil rights plan, the expectations around civil rights. Are you adhering to them? Are you following them? Are people well trained? How often do you do training on civil rights? What questions do you have for the Civil Rights Office? Are you getting answers for those? All those pieces above and beyond what would be in the checklist. Are you reaching out to the Civil Rights Office for any, support or questions you might have? So again, in advance of any site visit or audit, or of course a grant application, you have the confidence that you're doing things well. Same for compliance with ADA, Title VI, and LEP. So, and then of course EEO, and then DBE. And I know there's been a lot of changes in the last couple years about how to do the DBE reporting and helping people understand that a little bit better in the 5310 space. So we're working on those hurdles, but again, it's helpful to take a look at that. I would say that in the space of EEO, DBE, some of the financial management, even program management, a self-audit is helpful, but that's outside the scope of more of a site visit. That's definitely more in the audit space. So anytime you can do a self-audit, it could prepare you well for not just a site visit, but a potential audit. And so there's some different things that are definitely more in the audit space and things that are more in the site visit space. And we will champion those accordingly as I send out the different checklists. But again, just want to make sure everyone can take the right look and the right approach to making sure our houses are in order, so to speak, but also not feel overwhelmed by all the criteria. I'm just chip away at little by little. And of course, using it as a platform to say, like, okay, how can we coordinate efforts? How can we create a culture of shared learning? How can we advance coordination by what we are naturally doing well and what we will continue to do well by proxy of being willing to do the work that goes with preparing for site visits and doing these self-audits, if you will. So that is my hope for preparing for site visits. And again, it's going to start with vehicle maintenance and the safety component. And then as time permits and it makes sense, we will navigate to some of the other criteria. Any questions, thoughts on that? We just have a few minutes left, and I just want to be respectful of your time and allowing for you to have some time for questions, but also acknowledging that I want to make sure we end the meeting on time as well. So. Any questions? So again, I don't have any foresight that a site visit's coming. It's not suggestive that one is coming. I don't want anyone breathing into a paper sack having a panic attack because I think I suggested that we're having a site visit. It's just I really just want to make sure that everyone's in a posture of success and is prepared and can help each other internally, but also externally in being successful with the program. Because I think by doing so, we put ourselves in a great space to be able to coordinate. And that's, the end goal, right? To be able to serve more people well. And so if we're doing the right things, it allows for that to naturally progress. So that's my hope with that, other than the obvious being in compliance, right, with the program.
Hey, Janine, this is Steve with Hope.
Yeah.
I wanted to say that you had sent out a couple of checklists back in January, and we use those to kind of just give ourselves an impromptu once over, and they were very helpful in making sure that we were doing what we needed to, and that we knew where to find the stuff that we were going to be asked about. So I appreciate those checklists that you sent out. They were actually they helped us determine whether we were in good shape or not.
You're welcome. Yeah, I think I sent them out, to your point, in January, but I think for those of you that have been with me a while, I think I even sent them out like way back in 2019. I sent out a bunch. So they're probably buried in some email somewhere, but if you'd like to have the kind of the collection all at once, out to me, and I'd be more happy to send you the entire collection again. But I thought perhaps one approach might be just to wade into it from the shallow end all the way to the deeper end, so to speak, one little bit at a time, and just start with the two that I had mentioned, the vehicle maintenance and the safety. So I'm glad they were helpful, Steve. I appreciate the feedback. And I think, to be fair, if I'm not mistaken, I think it was either Easter Seals or Catholic Community Services that had sent me documentation a while back on what goes into a site visit or an audit. I don't recall which one it was, but it was somewhat of the genesis story for coming up with the checklist. It gave me a lens to think of different questions that could arguably be asked in each of these different criteria. So many thanks to them, and I apologize, I can't recall which organization it was, but they had shared it with me. And so had they not shared it with me, I would not have been able to put that together as quickly as I was able to. So I deserve the credit on that one too. All right, anything else before we draw the meeting to a close? And I don't know if Franny ever got a chance to be able to get her mic working. Franny, are you still on the call? I still can't hear you if you're talking. I don't know. All right. Yeah, still can't hear Franny. I'm sorry, Franny. We'll have to figure it out. I don't know why I can't hear you when you're talking. I could see your mic, disengage or whatever, so you're no longer muted, but I can't hear you. So I'm sorry, but I will circle back with you. I'll make sure I hear what you wanted to share and share it with the group as appropriate. So, all right. So just one quick reminder, if you are paid through federal dollars and that we should not be tracking this time towards in-kind, please let me know by sending me an email or sharing that now so that I can respond appropriately. And on that, I'm just going to wish everyone a great day and thank you for your investment of time in this meeting, and thanks for all the great work you do in serving so many people in our region. So have a great day, everyone. And of course, let me know how I can help.
Thank you very much.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Have a great day, everyone. I'm going to
too.
adjourn the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.